The Belt and Road Initiative is a long-term infrastructure and trade strategy launched by China in 2013, and at its core, it's about building and upgrading physical links between China to the rest of the world, because they got stuff to sell, they need to be able to shift it. So things like ports, railways, highways, logistics hubs, industrial zones, so that goods can be moved faster, much cheaper, with much fewer bottlenecks. So the belt part of that refers mainly to overland rail and road routes across Asia into Europe, while the road part refers to maritime shipping routes through various ports stretching across Southeast Asia, the Middle East, Africa and Europe. So rather than being one single project, it's actually a huge network of hundreds of projects designed to reduce friction in global trade and make large-scale exports, including cars and EVs and iPads and I don't know, kettles and stuff, far more efficient. So when people talk about Chinese EVs arriving in Europe or Australia or Middle East and beyond, I suppose just basically everywhere, the conversation usually focuses on manufacturing, cheaper labour, battery scale. If you talk about BYD, you'd say vertical integration, government support and subsidies and that sort of stuff. All of that matters. It is all very pertinent and relevant. Cars don't magically appear in foreign markets, so they have to be moved. And 20 years ago, it was actually a very long process to get a car from China to, say, France, for example. So they've got to be moved. And moving cars at scale is one of the most expensive, complex, fragile parts of the entire automotive business. Moving them, parking them, keeping track of things. The logistics must be a nightmare. So that is where China has quietly built a structural advantage. And if you're in the business of selling people stuff, then you need to be able to get that stuff moved and not forget where you put it, I suppose. To understand it, you have to understand what China was like not that long ago. I'm sure you're all aware. 1990, China's GDP per capita was roughly $300 to 350 US. Today, it's around 12 to 13,000 US, so roughly 30 odd times increase in a single generation. In 1990, less than 30% of China's population lived in a city. Today, almost 70% actually. And in 1990, China's total export value was under $100 billion. In 2024, for example, it was $3.5 trillion. So over recent years, China has been adding an entire Germany's worth of GDP to its GDP. So how have they done that? I'm baffled. I would love to know how they've done it. The transformation didn't just come from factories, it came from infrastructure. In the early 2000s, China began building highways, ports, and rail. And at a scale the world had not seen before. By the early 2010s, it had the world's largest domestic logistics system, but its global trade still depended heavily on infrastructure outside of its control. That's when the Belt and Road Initiative was launched in 2013. At the time, it was very widely criticised. I saw multiple things about this, and I remember at the time I had a subscription to the Financial Times, and they mentioned it a lot, actually, and that was back then. So some said it was vague, and I think some people said that it was politically motivated, and it was about power and control. Some people said it would never deliver returns, it was a silly thing, just like another project run by a country, investment, they're going to give the money away, it'll not come to anything. That has not happened at all. So over time, something very practical happened. Infrastructure started getting built, and now we see almost every EV that we buy from in Europe, for example, will benefit from the Belt and Road Initiative, and people don't really realise how or why. So we can talk a little bit about that. As of today, over 150 countries have signed the Belt and Road Cooperation Agreement. Total announced investment and construction contracts associated with the Belt and Road Initiative exceed over $1 trillion, depending on how narrowly you define it as well. Even conservative estimates put actual completed infrastructure in the hundreds of billions of dollars. So this isn't one road or one port. It's a whole, matrix of stuff. So let's break down what that system looks like in the real world, in real terms, so we can understand what the Belt and Road Initiative is. China has helped finance or build dozens of deep water ports across the world, across Asia, Africa, Middle East, parts of Europe as well. these aren't symbolic projects. They handle huge, hundreds of thousands of vehicles, real volumes of products. Some of the largest transport ships in the world, so if you look, for example, take Greece's port called Piraeus, I think you say, before Chinese investment, it handles 700,000 containers per year. Today, it averages over 5 million annually, so that is 7 times more. Why does that matter for EVs? Because modern car shipping relies on high throughput, roll-on, roll-off terminals, fast customs clearance, minimal dwell time. They call it dwell time, by the way. Every extra day a vehicle sits in a port can add roughly 20 to 40 US dollars per car in financing and storage costs. Multiply that by 1 million cars or by hundreds of thousands of vehicles, logistics alone can swing margins by hundreds of millions of dollars. So look at rail. The China European Railway Express network barely existed before 2010. Today it connects over 100 Chinese cities with more than 200 European cities across 25 countries. In 2013, fewer than 100 trains ran annually. In 2023, 10 years later, 17,000 trains run in a single year annually. So transit times by rail, 12 to 18 days compared to 35 to 45 days by sea. So rail is obviously more expensive per unit than a ship, far cheaper than air by many times, and dramatically faster than traditional shipping. Speed to market has real financial value. Of course, time is money. Now combine ports and rail with inland logistics. China has built dozens of what they call dry ports, inland customs and logistics hubs where various vehicles and components clear customs before ever reaching a seaport. That reduces congestion, cuts delays, smooths export processes, and that would have saved billions last year just doing that. So the result is something very, very few people talk about. I think it seems a bit dull to some people. It's one of the most important things defining logistics and shipping in the last 10 years. In many cases, it is now faster and more predictable to ship a car from inland China, middle of China, to Europe than it is to move a car between 2 European countries using legacy infrastructure. Obviously, if you drove it through Europe, that would be very quick, but that doesn't happen. So this has been measured in delivery times. So connect this directly to the EV market. We talk about this a lot, of course. China became the world's largest vehicle exporter in 2023, overtaking Japan. Total vehicle exports exceeded 5 million units, and EVs were a rapidly growing share. In 2024, China exported well over 1.2 to 1.5 million full electric vehicles, depending on how you count plug-ins. So Europe absorbed a large portion of that, and Australia, Southeast Asia, the Middle East, South America absorbed the rest. Of course, they're building factories there too, which obviously that would bypass logistics and shipping, I suppose. The critical point is that logistics costs per vehicle fall sharply with scale, just like any other things, really. And they are the first nation, really, to take this seriously, I think, with a full global structure rather than a bit of work here and there with permissions or, approving the Panama Canal or something like that, which itself was an incredibly big thing, a really hard thing to do. The Belt Road Initiative really is new and unique. There is just nothing really to compare it to. So if you fill ships, rail wagons and terminals consistently, and you don't have much spare space, and things get, they're on time and they're quick and they're efficient, just like battery production, by the way, the margins can get a lot thinner, basically, so they don't have to charge for errors or empty space and stuff like that. So that's one reason Chinese EV makers can absorb price cuts of 10% or 20% without collapsing, their profit margins, while legacy automakers are struggling, basically. China processes over 60% of the world's lithium, over 70% actually of the world's graphite, and a majority of battery cathode and anode material. Many of the raw materials come from overseas, such as Indonesia, Chile, Argentina, Africa is another one. There's a couple of others. Those materials move through infrastructure that simply China helped finance or modernize. That reduces transport risk, improves reliability, and also lowers the working capital requirements. Again, this feeds into EV costs, actually. It all goes full circle, really. Critics often focus on failed Belt and Road projects. There are, of course, many, but it's in the hundreds now, and infrastructure doesn't need to be perfect to be useful. So even if only 60 or 70% of the projects performed well, that is still a massive logistics network that simply didn't exist 15 years ago. Importantly, China has slowed new Belt and Road lending in recent years to give money to projects, basically. Not because it failed, but because basically the build-out phase is largely complete. It's been a decade or more now. The system now shifts from construction to utilization and efficiency optimization. This is why Belt and Road matters now more than it did when it launched. The pipes are built. The flow is increasing, of course, of things going through. If you look at the last 3 consecutive years now, so 2024, 3, 4 and 5, the amount of products that shipped on it or was transported on the Belt and Road Initiative effectively went up and up and up significantly every year. EVs are simply the latest high value and quite large, quite heavy product moving through that system. 7 years ago, China really didn't export many electric vehicles at all. Not in the millions for sure. Now it's in the millions, so this makes a huge difference because, like I said, they're big, they're expensive, they're heavy. So people ask how Chinese EVs arrive cheaper and faster, and when they do, you know, in larger volumes, the answer isn't just batteries or labor, which is basically what they say. Labor's cheap in China, and batteries, you know, they're very good and efficient at making batteries, and they're just cheap, and that's obviously where the money is coming from. It's that China invested early in reducing friction in a way that no other country or continent really has. In time and distance and uncertainty, they won, basically. So they took a top-down approach, a global perspective. If you look at it this way, in 1990, China struggled to move goods internally because most people didn't live in a city. That makes things a bit more complex. By 2005, it had mastered manufacturing very, very well. As we know, BYD started off as a technology company. 2015, it began mastering global logistics, and that's, you know, when you start to see things like AliExpress get quite popular, Temu, that sort of stuff. Not Temu, I suppose, back then, but you know, things like that started to come around. You can buy something for £1.50 and get it delivered in the UK 2 weeks later, or a month later, or a week and a half, that sort of thing. Now, on average, if I look at I did this experiment the other day. I looked on some of my products that I bought from China over the last year, and basically the last, 6 or 7 of them, they averaged between 5 and 7 days to get from China to my door. So very, very quick. It's a bit weird when you see the processes of where it's had to go and how it's got there. Very, very quick. By 2020, the logistics system became an export beast that the world largely doesn't really know too much about, actually. The Belt and Road Initiative, most people won't know about it, but it is incredibly big. It's a big deal. Not because of politics, because of economics. And the world is just, I think these days, the world is so noisy, we probably struggle to focus on certain things like this, which on the face of it, it's a less captivating topic than so many other things going on in the world right now. I won't mention the T word, of course. Heavy goods, long distances, tight margins. China built infrastructure to make those problems just smaller. They've made the world a smaller place, effectively. That is the hidden EV advantage. It is one of the reasons China is going to absolutely get filthy rich, I think, over the next 10 or 20 years. It is measured not in slogans, but in days saved, dollars avoided, millions of vehicles moved. I think that's what this is how this is going to go. The biggest benefit of the Belt and Road Initiative is that it reduces friction in global trade in very practical ways by investing in ports, rail links, logistics hubs, and customs coordination. It cuts transport times, sometimes, as you know, way more than half. Lower shipping costs makes supply chains more predictable, which is especially valuable for heavy, high-value goods such as vehicles or air compressors or things like that, batteries, industrial equipment. For participating countries, it can unlock trade routes that they never had, better even trade deals as well, attract manufacturing and improve basic infrastructure faster than domestic funding alone would have allowed. So it actually improves the quality of life, I suppose, for the people in the countries that it operates in. The biggest hurdles, though, I would say, have been the debt risk, uneven project quality, obviously, political pushback. Some projects were poorly planned, majorly overbuilt, or financed on terms that proved hard for host countries to sustain, and others ran into governance issues, changing governments and things like that, or geopolitical resistance from rival powers. As a result, China has slowed and tightened lending in recent years, shifting from aggressive expansion to making existing infrastructure actually just better and more efficient and just work, very reliably, which is where many of the real economic benefits are now starting to show. You can definitely see things like that in the figures. What are your thoughts on the Belt and Road Initiative? My name is Ben Alexander. Thank you to these people. These are the new channel members, and I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. For anyone who's bought me a coffee or joined on Patreon or something like that, or joined on YouTube, thank you for watching.